we're moving now into sort of trying to find some examples of what you've been talking about. You've been mentioning that idea of resilience, the frustration, the sense of empathy, and that long-term view that needs to happen in strategic design. You've been practicing for a while, and from your bio, you've got some very interesting examples of things. I won't ask you to take us through a particular project, but I'd be really fascinated to hear about some illustrations of those concepts that you've mentioned already.
Okay. I think one of the things about strategic design from the perspective that I've worked in it from is that I've never really hit the scale that I've wanted to yet. And getting to that scale of really holistic organisational transformation is really, really challenging, of course. One of the roles that I was previously in, my remit was actually all about how do you enable an organisation to be more human-centred and design-led in the way that it does things, which is effectively a cultural change piece, which is absolutely the remit of strategic design, trying to create that overarching strategy for how do you actually make that happen, and then all the way down to what activities are you going to do, how is that going to look, what does that mean for the collateral, what does that mean for the values of the organisation, so hitting every single level. And an amazing opportunity. And I think one of the interesting things about strategic design is that you never know what you're going to come up against and until you're kind of really in it. And Dan Hill talks about the problem to be solved was quite finite and quite realisable in terms of design-led and human-centred. That's kind of easy problem to solve in some ways, but trying to understand the dark matter of the organisation, as Dan Hill talks about, and actually understanding what's going on in that organisation and the culture that was sitting around it at the time, and getting into the depths of what the organisation embodies rather than what it just espouses, meant that there were a whole bunch of challenges within that, trying to do some of that work that just barriers came up non-stop within it. So I think that's the thing with strategic design. You try and find your quick wins at the really little level, and then you're always trying to get into who's the person that I need to speak to next? How do I shift them to the place that they need to be? What's going to work best for that person? How do I communicate with them? Who are the next layer of decision-making, people that I need to work with and influence? What's that story that they need to hear? And it's you're kind of working on several layers all at the same time to kind of reach that point where you have strategically started to shift some of those ways of thinking, ways of working, and culture in how people just want to approach things overall.
And of course you're dealing with cultures that might be from the health sector or corporate sector, which I imagine are quite different in some ways. There'd be some similarities but differences as well.
Absolutely. And
is that part of your job prior to going into, or at the early stage, to try and read the cultures that you're in?
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of the requirement to be absolutely empathic, because you cannot approach any person or organisation in exactly the same way. So the first thing you need to do is understand who the people are and what's going on for them, and try and get below the surface as much as you can to sense make what is the culture, what's the real culture here, what's really going on, and how do I need to work with these people that's going to be best for them and get the outcome that they're after.
And in that sort of complex system, naturally there's going to be fails as well as wins.
Absolutely.
And how do you deal with that? What's the strategy to get over that rather than just run away from it in small or larger scale?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting problem actually, and opportunity, is that in strategic design, by nature of the layers that you're working at and you're trying to influence and move people and shift them, often we're trying to work with them to be more empathic and human-centred in the way that they're doing things, and that requires a sense of them being prepared enough to change themselves or to change things in their organisation, which means that you're actually asking them to bring an incredible vulnerability to the table that they may not be comfortable with. So a lot of the time you can pick up quite quickly if that person already has the right mindset to go through this kind of work, or if you can shift them to grow into this kind of work. But sometimes you can just learn really quickly that they're not ready and they're not prepared to go there. And often it means making a call of, do we work with this person or not? Do we do this piece of work or not? Do we problem solve the work rather than strategically design the work with that extra context piece?
It's like a fallback position if you have to.
Yeah, because the people aren't ready for it. And that was one of the things that I came across in that organisation where I was wanting to make it more human-centred and design-led. They weren't in the right position or the right maturity to actually be able to enter into that space. I've also seen things in other roles where, you know, we were working with another large organisation doing a similar kind of piece of work, and our key stakeholder that had us into the business, we worked with him for about 18 months, really amazing, lovely person, but it was constantly just trying to coach him into the mindset and the preparedness to kind of lead the organisation through some of this human centricity work. And it was really tough work to try and get him there, and there was a point where it was sort of like, is he just the wrong person for us to be working with, and do we need another entry point into this organisation to make it work? So we kind of made a call that we keep working with him, but it actually wasn't helpful, and he actually wasn't prepared, and we probably should have stopped the work a long time ago, sort of thing. Yeah. So being really clear about the person that you're working with, or the people or the teams, is really important, because at that strategic level, if you don't have the right people, it's just not going to work. Not going to work.
And do you think that might be a stage thing, so that people might go through that experience of human-centred design and realise that's got some value to them, and then maybe move further forward if they're prepared then?
Yeah, I often talk about the kind of work I do as being a ripple effect.
Yep.
So often, you know, the kind of work that I do provides the opportunity for change, I guess, individually, at a personal level or professional level, or as a team or organisation. And the way that people take that on will happen in their own time, depending on their readiness. So for some people, they might have that human centricity light bulb straight away. Yep. Other people, it might take, you know, years and years and years. But from my perspective, my role is to primarily allow that ripple effect to be in the world, and then it's up to the person and their preparedness to take it on or not.
On the other side, I imagine there's a fair amount of research that you need to do in any project to understand all the dimensions of it. Do you work with teams of researchers in the average project? Is that part of this arrangement?
Yeah, I wouldn't say teams so much. I've never worked in big teams, so it's usually like, you know, 2 or 3 people probably on a strategic design project. It always works best when you have at least 2 people full-time on one project, and allows that focus to occur, particularly because they're often quite intensive pieces of work. But yeah, the research is an incredibly important piece of work with understanding who all the humans are involved in whatever you're designing. So, you know, if that's internal to an organisation, go and talk to the people in the organisation, and if it's with customers, go and talk to customers. Often you need to do both in strategic design, because you're usually creating something that affects people both internally and end user. Yep. So creating that understanding across everything is really important.
And that communication is storytelling. From what I was picking up before, there's a lot of storytelling involved in that to communicate that to the stakeholders and the people in both sides. Yeah,
absolutely. So we'll do a bunch of research, and we always choose the most appropriate research method that's useful for that project. Interestingly, the project that I'm working on at the moment is using the most kind of research methods in one project I've ever done. It feels like bigger than a PhD, actually. So at the moment, I'm working on a research project that's everything from testing information architecture to diary studies to just one-on-one interviews, customer research workshops, usability testing, so a whole range of methods that we're using to get the information that we need, which is really exciting. But yeah, absolutely, it's all how do you draw all of that information together into something that's meaningful. And I think that's one of the core things that design, I believe, in general should do, but definitely in strategic design, is rather than analysing the information, it's all about synthesis of that information. So it's moving from just presentation of data effectively to how do you storytell that information in a really compelling way that then allows action to occur from that. So a lot of the stories we tell are like, we generally tell stories from the human perspective. So, if I'm a customer, I would use the language in the storytelling of like, I want to be able to make my purchases simply and easily, for example. And then we put it in that kind of positive action-oriented voice that then allows action to occur from that.
And I guess one thing most designers think about is a deliverable at the end. You're getting paid to produce something. A lot of what you seem to be doing is the process of this. Is there something at the end that you hand over, or has that been achieved before you get to that point?
I think it's both, actually. So much of it is how do you take people on the journey in a really useful, valuable way. Particularly if you're externally consulting in, you have to have the internal people by your side the whole way, because they need to own it and they need to be able to communicate that story. You don't really need to communicate it so much as they do, because they need to, after you leave, they need to be able to own it and take it on and deliver it effectively. So the deliverables can really shift a lot depending on the project that you're on. And it's really outcome driven. So what's the outcome that we're after, and then what's the deliverable that will best help us get there? There is definitely always that you're delivering always through that kind of enabling and awareness and capability building of the people that you bring along on that journey. But I think, by nature of the fact that strategic design generally includes a component of service design or product design or something else as well, you're doing standard things like delivering a product or delivering a service blueprint, for example, or forms of journey maps. There's often kind of customer insight reports that go with that kind of tell that story in a more compelling way. Often there are things like design principles that then can inform how something else can happen afterwards. So more that, this is the strategy, these are the insights, these are kind of the tangible artifacts that go along with that. But it really does vary depending on the project.
Sounds fascinating. Thank you.